So not many shapeshifters make it back a second time, but some do. One of those, I think only the second shapeshifter ever to do so, is Stacey Brewer. And when she was first here, she was telling us about this newfangled idea that there was some cynicism about. And it was the case of you get kids into a classroom. You tell it, the concept. You get kids into a classroom, you give them a screen, and you let them loose in the world of education. I'm summarizing.
So let me rather reposition it, Bruce. That's not exactly what we do, but we follow a blended learning model, which is technology that's been integrated into the schooling system. And we were actually the first on the African continent. And we currently follow two blended learning models. The first one is a lab rotation in the foundation phase, which is grade R3, where the children get introduced to a concept by the teacher. They then leave the classroom and they go into a learning lab, which is fundamentally a computer room where they're interacting with adaptive software to allow for extension, review and reinforcement of what's been introduced in the classroom, and then they feed back into the classroom. That creates a very data-rich environment in order for us to differentiate our instruction. But as Spark has evolved over the years and our children have got older, we see that they've got a greater sense of responsibility. And so our model evolved into a flex model where each child is on their own rotation, moving through different modalities of learning depending on their choice and their different level of competency, and at the same time making sure that we personalize their learning.
You need to translate that into English, because that sounds like the most terrifying school to try and manage in the world, where you've got kids who are difficult enough to manage in a group suddenly being given this massive freedom to expand their brains at whatever rate is possible for them.
Bruce, the children are absolutely able to do so. We've got a very strong focus on culture at Spark in terms of our behavior management, positive narration. And so we've created an environment where the children know how to make the right choices and there are consequences for them not to make the right choices. And so you actually...
So if you're meant to be doing mathletics and you go and play whatever, I don't know, whatever games there are.
No, Bruce,
you can't do games.
We absolutely can't do games. There's supervision that keeps a track on how our children are doing. There's a lot of reporting that we look at the back end. Children aren't able to go rogue.
You started with 160 kids in one school in Randburg.
Yes.
That was 2012.
That was 2013 when we launched our first school.
5 years ago. You have now got 15 campuses.
Yes, we currently operate 15 schools, mainly Johannesburg, Pretoria, one in Stellenbosch, and we're educating over 7,000 children now, employing over 750 staff members, and we are opening another 6 schools in the new year.
How are you doing this? Because this is a capital-intensive business. Opening schools is not child's play, literally.
Absolutely. I mean, we do have investors that fund the growth of the organization. We've got 3 international funds and then some private individuals in South Africa. But at Spark, everything that we focus on is cost efficiency. And so we make sure that we minimize the cost of opening new schools in terms of comparison, both for local and government and private schools. And we actually about a third of what it would cost an elite private school to open.
Kids going into this, and it took you a while, I think, to get the buy-in. The kids would buy in immediately because kids are massively adaptable. Parents, however, personal experience, are less adaptive. You're taking a risk when you take your children into something brand new, something untested, and you're putting them at the mercy of a newfangled idea in education.
I mean, we are completely grateful for the families that started with us because for sure it was a risk, but we believed in the model so much. We had a proven track record in terms of the model that we had seen out of the US and we took inspiration from. But over time, it takes time to educate families. It's very hard to explain our model because it's so different to what we all know. But once parents or potential parents come and see Spark, they experience the feeling, what happens at school in terms of the engagement of the children, they're absolutely sold. And now actually our biggest form of marketing is word of mouth in terms of parent satisfaction and seeing how their children have developed in such a short space of time.
What curriculum do you follow?
So we align to the national standards and then we extend based on international expectations. So we benchmark against Singapore for maths and literacy we benchmark against the UK.
Okay, so you take kids, you find some really bright 8-year-olds who they take the curriculum, done and dusted, they are so far ahead. You're now extending them and stretching them. how do you run the risk of overextending kids to a point where they get to the next grade? Suddenly, if they're in grade 3 at age 8 and they're due to go to grade 4, age 9, and 5, age 10, where suddenly actually they're leaps and bounds ahead of their age groups, some of these kids, because they've been allowed to expand their brains.
So first of all, Bruce, just to clarify, we don't screen any of our children in terms of academic achievement. It really is a first come, first served basis. We aim to prove that any child from any community can achieve. And anywhere at every different grade levels, even though the children are at the same age, they are at different levels of competency. We absolutely have the ability to grow our children and extend them based on different areas. Not one child is necessarily perfect in absolutely every subject, but there's different opportunities for us to continue to grow them. And there's a lot more focus also now on character development, EQ, which is really preparing our children for the future.
And this is the marvelous thing about the model that you use, because kids are being monitored in real time, whereas I could sit at the back of the classroom and throw spitballs at the kid in front of me, the back of the kid in front of me's head, and the teacher might miss out on that, and I might catch up later on, or might forget to hand in my exercise book. When you're doing everything digitally, there is a real-time check as to who is extending themselves and who is being held back or holding themselves back, or who's mucking about.
Absolutely. There's no opportunity for any child to be left behind. And we make sure that every child is being addressed in terms of their needs and their different level of competency to make sure that they are growing all the time.
2013, you start with 169 kids. And what grades are they in? Because they're getting through the primary school section of education.
So currently our oldest grade is grade 7 at Spark Ferndale, which was our first school that we launched in 2013. And due to the pressure from families and obviously our offering, we have now extended our offering, and we will be opening a high school next year. That will be immediately for next year, we'll be focused on our grade 7 intake for this year. But going forward, there will be a Spark school offering in as many regions as possible.
But the first one, are you simply going to extend the campus that you're at the moment, or are you acquiring new space? How are you doing
It's a brand new space, so it's a completely new campus.
How are you funding this?
So we've got private investors, 3 international funds that are more focused on impact investment, and then some private individuals, local private wealthy individuals in South Africa.
Local private wealthy individuals.
Yes.
How do you find these people? Do they find you, or do you find them?
So at the beginning, it was a lot of knocking on people's doors and a lot of doors being closed back to us. But over time, we've really focused on building our reputation and our credibility locally and internationally. And once you have 1 or 2 really big investors with a great reputation as well, often other investors want to get involved.
It's breaking into those networks, isn't it? And there is a I don't want to call them a club, but investors who can't take all of the risk by backing you, but might recommend to somebody they know who will like what you do. Have a look at these guys. They're worth looking at. We put money in.
Absolutely. And generally, the market is very small, the type of investors that are focusing on impact investment, especially in education internationally. But unfortunately, there are not enough players, really trying to push the mold in terms of education, developing networks in developing markets. But since we actually started, we've seen a lot more players coming to the market, which is great, because then hopefully it will attract more investment over time.
And private education was a booming business, and then we saw the guys from, I think it was Advotech last year, saying there's an issue with immigration, and they're seeing the waiting times getting short, the waiting lists getting a bit shorter, and they're worried that the private school model is being overstretched, and the economy wasn't helping either. Are you feeling those sorts of pressures at Spark as well?
Bruce, we felt no pressure in terms of enrollment and demand for Spark. If I look at, we grew already from last year into this year about over 70%. So, and on average, we've been doubling every year. So we haven't felt that yet. Where we are, feeling the pressure is parents are struggling to pay. And so it's important that we, work with our parents to make sure that we can figure out a payment plan so that they can prioritize the school fees.
You've doubled in growth every year. Is that in terms of the volumes of children that you're educating, or is that in revenue terms? Is there a correlation between those two?
pretty much doubled in terms of number of children that we educate, which obviously then will be linked directly to revenue.
And revenue will grow, but your cost base grows at the same time. Are your revenues outstripping your cost base?
Yes, we are becoming more efficient over time, which is great to see. And we are refocusing and making sure that we have developed strong systems, procedures in place to make sure we're even more efficient going forward.
When do you find 750 staff buying into this principle in South Africa?
So a big focus for our recruitment is really on the mission and vision of Spark. And so that's immediately a big focus. And we recruit for what we call GEMS, which is characteristics of Spark of grit, excellence, mission alignment, and self-reflection. And there are a huge amount of people out there in South Africa that want to do a lot of good. And what's really excited me over the last few years of starting and then growing Spark is that the caliber of people that we're starting to attract is becoming better and better and better. So people want to create change in this country. They just need to have the right opportunity to do so. And we're seeing that at Spark.
Spark Schools co-founder, Stacey Brewer in studio with me this evening. Got any questions for Stacey? Give us a shout. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. Daryl, with you in a moment. In 2013, the co-founder of Spark Schools, Stacey Brewer, had just finished her MBA at Gibbs and launched a revolution in schooling in South Africa, daring to do it differently, taking the curriculum, but applying that curriculum in a far more adventurous and interactive fashion, using technology as a tool to enhance the learning experience of young kids in school. Those first kids in 2013, the older kids there are now getting to the end of primary school and going to senior school, and the announcement a couple of weeks ago by Stacey Brewer and Ryan Harrison that they'll be launching a senior school as well. It's all about innovation. It's about taking the best of global best practice and using it to give the kids the best possible education that they can receive in South Africa. 15 campuses with I've lost track, another 6 to come next year.
Exactly, another 6 in the new year.
No, I want to talk to you about how this story is amplified further on. But first, Daryl in Centurion, please, your question for Stacey.
Good evening. I just wanted to find out, I have 2 of my kids that go to Spark School in Centurion. One and the other one's in grade 3. What I have picked up is that the one that came from the government school in grade 3, she's settling a bit because the model and the teaching style is a little bit different. However, the one in grade 1 is enjoying it. She's having fun, and it's something she's obviously just got into the system. But the reason why I'm calling is that I have another daughter who's now in grade 8, and we would like to put her there, but the one in Centurion, and I see some of the others, they stop at a certain point, they don't continue. Is there a plan to take it right up to grade 10?
Grade 12 even. Daryl, thank you.
12,
maybe you could sign up too, Daryl. Anyway, Daryl's gone. Don't be mean to Daryl. We were talking, so the Ferndale school is going to be the first one to get a senior school, but clearly there are pockets of demand everywhere. And if you're in Centurion, Ferndale's a bit of a stretch.
Obviously, from a location point of view, and thank you, Daryl, for calling in. We really do value and appreciate our families. Unfortunately, there won't be a high school in the Centurion area next year, but the idea is to be opening high schools over the next few years to ensure that we're serving as many regions as possible.
Okay. So, Daryl, yeah, that's not the answer that you wanted to hear immediately. How about Sparks boarding schools? And then, Daryl, let's make your life completely impossible to manage. What's the growth been like, though? Because, I mean, I don't want to give away your age, but, you've not worked extensively in other industries. You did your MBA. You went into this business. You started it from scratch. You've doubled it every year over 5 years. That's a growth curve that would scare most people out of their wits. How have you coped?
Bruce, I think the main thing has been the support structures that I've got around me. I have mentors that have been part of my growth, part of my journey from the beginning, that bring me up when I'm feeling down, bring me down when I'm feeling too high. And that's really, really enabled us to do what we do. I've got a team that is exceptional and committed, with a real strong sense of responsibility and ownership and commitment to the families, to make sure that we continue to deliver on our service and constantly improve it.
You built credibility in a really short period of time. And as a young person, That's really hard to do. A young person with a concept that's untried and untested in an environment. How did you build that credibility so quickly?
Bruce, I want to say it's luck. I've been forming relationships with people for a really long time, and I think by people just observing, seeing how we've developed and grown over a very short space of time is built on that credibility. What we said we're going to do, we do.
That's the most important thing, though, isn't it? Because if you create an expectation, deliver on the expectation, that expectation is then met, create a new set of expectations, and deliver on those, and that's how you build it.
Absolutely. You've got to be predictable in your leadership. You've got to be consistent. I think people really appreciated our vision, the values that we stand for, that we really aim to live by. We might not always get it perfect, but we're always looking at ways to improve it. And I think that's what people really appreciate.
Now, investors do like to see exponential growth. They love to see the sort of growth rates that you've delivered. The doubling every year has been credible and good. And you've got another big leap happening into 2019. But at some point, private investors want to get out of their investments. They're not married to you. They're not wedded to this principle. Their goal is to make a decent return on their investment. They're going to want to get out at some point. Have you got a pipeline of next generation investors?
Actually, funny that, Bruce, as an organization, we've moved out of the startup phase into the scale up, so seed capital into growth capital. And so over the next few years, we will be looking at potential changes in our shareholders, because our current shareholder base is definitely more focused on seed capital. And so I'm starting to form relationships now with different organizations internationally, funds that could be part of our growth capital over the next 5 years.
What's foreign investors' interests in investing in an education business in South Africa? What's in it for them other than the returns?
So there's a lot for people to learn from Spark in South Africa. No one internationally is doing what we're doing in terms of quality and at this price point. So the international attention that we are getting is an idea that if they get involved with Spark, potentially they could take it to other regions across Africa or across the world that they invest in. It's definitely more international education companies that are interested in us. But they like our offering, especially our quality at our price point, and seeing if they can adapt it to their local markets.
Is that your ambition, though, to take Spark global, or are you happy to focus in this market to grow it here for the foreseeable future?
Bruce, there's such a huge demand in South Africa. We did a study just in terms of the families that we serve, and we could be opening over 3,000 schools or running 3,000 schools. So the demand's huge here. There's no need to necessarily cross borders. However, maybe the next, say, 5 to 10 years, we absolutely would start looking at that. We are open to people come and visit us and see what we do. We've had people from Brazil. We've had people from India looking at ways at how they could start models similar to Spark within their country.
So you share this intellectual property. You share this principle, this concept. You're not holding on to the great secret. This isn't sort of the Coca-Cola recipe idea.
No, Bruce, you spoke earlier about Instagram and previously also about just policy, and it's all about implementation. So ideas are great, but we feel if we can share ideas, support other organizations in their implementation, it will benefit everyone. The demand internationally is so huge. You've just seen now the Gates Foundation are starting to invest in education globally, which they've never done before. They just focus on the US. So it's important that we do share and make sure that everyone rises together.
How do we apply what you're doing on a relatively small scale with 7,000 kids to 1 million kids that start in grade 1 every single year in South Africa, half of whom make it to matric, a fraction of whom will qualify and do decently in STEM subjects?
Bruce, it's something that I'm speaking with the team internally. How exactly do we really scale what we're doing? Not necessarily opening schools. I think a big focus that we could do and support existing schools is on professional development around our teachers, the school leaders, and giving them the tools that they are able to deliver and serve all of their children within their classroom and within their school.
The incredible story of Spark Schools, the rapid growth of Spark Schools, a concept untested and untried as a short time ago as 5 years ago. Stacey Brewer is the co-founder. She's the chief executive of Spark Schools, doing amazing things in South African education, in private sector for now, but there's got to be this opportunity to cross-pollinate.